Okay, fantastic. Okay, yes. So we are Jonty and I are the directors of Bat Studio, Between Art and Technology Studio, which we founded, I think, in 2012. And this is an image of our headquarters, world headquarters in Walthamstow. So this is where we both make things and design things. So we're an RBA chartered architecture practice, but we also fabricate a lot of our own projects, and that's led to us doing quite a lot of artworks and interior projects because it's a slightly unconventional setup for an architecture practice. This is our workshop space where we assemble things. In Walthamstow, we're quite lucky with the space we've got. It's we've been there about 5 years now. And we've got good neighbours, and I don't know if anyone knows Walthamstow, but we're sort of located on an industrial estate surrounded by breweries and gin makers and other nice ways of spending time at the weekend. These are some other projects, the sort of thing that we have done. So the projects on the top left, I've got my mouse still works, I think. Top left is the offices at UCA Architecture School in Canterbury. This is a little building we've recently completed in Walthamstow, which has been nominated for an RIBA award, which is quite complimentary for a small building. We're quite chuffed with that. This is a classroom we did recently. This is a bar we did recently, which is all 2 years ago now, actually, which is also in Walthamstow. So these are largely projects where we make things. We do a lot of making our own way. I'm going to talk quickly about a project we did at Guy's and Sir Thomas's Cancer Centre with Liz O'Sullivan, who's sat in the middle there and I think is also watching, which was also commissioned under the arts programme in a new hospital building. This was our original concept sketch for the space. So the listening room, or the living room, as it was intended, it was a sort of non-religious, non-secular space for escapism, for a sort of quiet few moments, somewhere you could get away from the general hospital environment in the new cancer centre. So the theme was sort of escapism, I suppose. And for that reason, we wanted to propose somewhere which would help people's imaginations to sort of imagine they were somewhere else, because we kind of figured there's only so much we can do to make people feel they're not in a hospital environment, but people's imaginations can do a lot more. So we proposed a space which would have these audio installations within it, which would be soundscapes from different places around the world, which could help people imagine they were somewhere else around the world by listening to the sounds from somewhere else and thinking about what it'd be like to be there instead of Southwark. So to do that, we had to do a whole bunch of the technical stuff, which I might come back to, but that was the theme of the room. This is the space that we took on to build the space in. So as is sort of the challenge that we're looking at now, the sort of trying to create something which isn't hospital-like in a hospital environment is quite a challenge, because they're all very, very similar looking blank canvases to start working with. This was our initial proposal for how we wanted to try and transform the space. So in here, we were looking at trying to use materials which would work acoustically with the sound installation that we were planning to build. So what we would like to do at this point, what we'd like to do at this point, was to make the walls padded effectively, something like a sound studio or an anechoic chamber or somewhere. So we're talking about using felts or carpets on the walls. I thought it's kind of an interesting case study to bring up because we were unable to do those two things, and it sort of highlights a couple of challenges that we're facing and also working in all these sort of environments. In that the felt was not allowed under infection control rules, and using carpets on the wall, though we were able to find carpets that were allowed in hospital environments, they hadn't been tested horizontally for their fire performance when used on a wall, so they weren't able to be used either. So there's a quite interesting sort of little nuances of trying to test what we are and aren't allowed to do. We're trying to do things a little bit less conventional in these environments. This is where we got to instead. This is some of the images of us when we were building the project. So that's Ollie on the left in our workshop. We hadn't made our workshop quite as nice at this point. In the centre is the solution we came up with on the walls, where we had to wrap tiles in a fabric, because this is a fabric that you're allowed to use on chairs in hospitals, and we wrapped a I can't remember the number, hundreds and hundreds of tiles, fireproof MDF tiles in this fabric in order to get the appearance of what we're aiming to achieve within the rules of infection control and fire. And that's Ertl, not quite, it's a blast from the past. But he was a good guy working with us at the time. And some images of how the install sort of went to try and transform that space, which eventually ended up looking like this. So the final space had these series of speakers, which were concealed in these boxes at the top, which were a special type of speaker, a parabolic speaker, which only sends a very narrow beam of sound. So you can sort of sit here and not hear the sounds that are coming out of the speaker over here. In addition to the speakers, they also had earphone sockets for people with different levels of hearing. And each of the speakers was connected to a tablet, which ran the sound installation, which had about 30 different locations around the world loaded into it, for which we made generative soundscapes. So they would sound like different places around the world. We used real-time weather data, and we used a sort of time of day and a local mixing library to create soundscapes that sound similar to good representation of what it would sound like in each of those locations at that exact moment somewhere else in the world. This is another space we did at Guy's and St Thomas's Cancer Centre, which was the survivor space, which is another space in which we use a lot of bamboo. So both the space I've just shown you and this one use bamboo plywood, which is a product which, particularly a few years ago, wasn't being used very much. It's being used a lot more now. Places like people like IKEA are getting into it for their products. But it's one of these things that's marketed as a kind of wonder material. It's bamboo is extraordinarily fast growing, and the plywood, and I think most bamboo products are extremely hard wearing. It's that sort of impact testing it makes it stronger than oak. And it's aesthetically, we like it very much. This wall in the background here with the tree was a marquetry wall that we made. So that's two types of bamboo plywood, one inlaid in the other. So we CNC cut out from the wall panels to lay in the tree. And then, as you can see down here, we then sort of layered up the bamboo plywoods to get an effect as it bursts out the top. This project also at Guy's and St Thomas's. This is in the rare diseases unit. This is a wall with a light installation behind it. So these lights flicker and appear to simulate fireflies. So the image on the wall is of Streatham Common. We had a photographer called Simon Kennedy go down there to shoot, I think it's about 16 images, which were then combined together to create an extremely high definition image, because we wanted to get this wall as vivid as we possibly could, because it's a very large wall and sort of pixelated printing isn't the effect we were after. And then behind that we had, I think it's about 3,600 LEDs, which were all addressed and were controlled by a small control computer, which ran an algorithm which was written specifically for the project to mimic the life cycle of fireflies. So they go through cycles of generations of life. So they start out with very few fireflies, and then they multiply through a sort of life cycle whereby we end up with more and more of them. And as they through that life cycle, they sync up with each other and start to flash in unison, and then they start to die out and go to periods of less activity. So the easiest way to control this was to look directly at how the fireflies really live in their real lives. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in progress ideas for this project. This is very much a sort of sketchbook of ideas, I would say, and sort of things that we're looking at. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas about the process that we are currently working through to design a series of reception spaces and waiting spaces in the imaging centre. These are two kind of key starting points for our interests here. One is, I guess, biophilia in nature in general, but we're quite interested in sort of macro textures and sort of richness and detail in natural imagery. So not necessarily sort of big views, but how sort of patterning in nature, I guess. So I think the sort of moss garden here is a good example. And the other influence we've taken on board from previous conversations with patients and other stakeholders is the importance of the bottom of the cherry trees, which are in the area of the building, and also a cherry tree was taken down for this building to be built. So those are two key sort of natural references we're starting from. These are examples of different wallpapers that use natural imagery. So we're interested in working on surfaces on the walls in this project. So the image in the center is William Morris. This image here is actually one I found of a wallpaper in what was my grandparents' house, which I thought was rather good. And this is a more Japanese inspired wallpaper. I don't think it's a particularly famous wallpaper or anything, but Japanese inspired illustration of cherry blossom. So this is a kind of, it's quite an important reference for us. We're thinking about how you kind of turn biophilia into a 2D, 2.5D wall treatment in some way, and looking at the classic references for that. This is some work by a good friend of ours who's working with us on this project called Adam Heslov. He's a computational designer who works in various sort of 3D softwares and all sorts of crazy ninja wizard computer skills. But all of these images here, these three main images here, are computer generated, taken from animations Adam's made, where he algorithmically creates organic forms over time. So we think this is quite a sort of good reference of how some of these designers, perhaps sort of William Morris type time, where the repeating patterns or even non-repeating patterns are kind of algorithmic in their own way. They're algorithmic or repeating or rule-based interpretations which reference nature. And that's very much what we think this is. And it also sort of pushes into that kind of hyper-real micro detail that we're very interested in with the bamboo and the sort of patterns in nature. We, as a design studio, have a big CNC machine and we design around it a lot. So we cut wood accurately from drawings because Jonty and I's background is from architecture. So we're interested in creating surfaces which have relief and texture. This was a product which was suggested by the team at the arts team, which was also part of the inspiration that these bamboo plywoods offer some real color and interest when you start carving into them to certain depths. So we're keen to see how we could sort of use these techniques, but use them in our own way with our own algorithms, which is what we've got developing in the background at the moment, although we haven't any cut tests to show. So this is some algorithmic experimentation to how we might start perhaps growing or evolving our own patterns that we can then carve from bamboo with our CNC machine to get various textures, which is literally going on at the moment. We're doing some of our first test cuts with this tomorrow. So what we're sort of interested in is how we can then perhaps, once we've generated these patterns, these reliefs, how we can start to use those in different ways in different parts of the building. So these are all the patterns in this document are hypothetical sort of placeholders to let us test materials and talk about other ideas about material and color. Ceramics is something else that we would like to incorporate into the project. So there was a conversation about whether we could use the clay that's been dug out of the foundations for the new building, which we haven't entirely ruled out. We're still kind of quite keen to see if we can do that, although it might be complicated. But having looked at the idea at all, whether we can use that clay or not, we're super keen on using ceramics in the project. So what we're hoping is that we can use the same sort of formwork or forms that we use to make reliefs carving wood. We can also carve molds that we can then pack clay into to create ceramics. We're working with a company just north of London called H.G. Matthews, who make bespoke bricks, and they made the handmade bricks for this project of ours in Walthamstow. So we will work with Adam on our algorithmic side to create the shapes, and then we'll go and work with the craftspeople at H.G. Matthews to work on the ceramic objects. This is a little test down here. But this is the sort of thing we're wondering if, we're using the same pattern on the wall to create a bamboo relief texture to soften a space. Can we then use the same pattern but inverted, in this case perhaps made deeper, to create maybe reception desks that have got sort of deep sort of shapes to them. All of this is going to be interesting chat with infection control, but we can work the designs to make things cleanable, hopefully. These are some color tests around the same idea. So we can get fantastic control over some parts of the design. For example, the carving and the shapes we've got total control over. Colors of ceramics we've got really good control over because they're all mixed and made to measure. Other products are only available in certain colors. So floorings and surfaces are things that we're sort of working back from, if you like. These are some initial, just quick material comparisons. So this is the bamboo product. That's a fabric which is the softest looking hospital approved fabric we can find. It sort of doesn't look shiny, and some ceramic samples, some colors that we quite like, a little bit of subtlety. So we're interested in trying to find sort of three subtly different colors so that we can distinguish between the three floors. Well, at this point, subtle. We've tried some other options too. This is us working back from the colors that are available a little bit, right? So having identified the softest, one of the most restrictive part of the palette, if you like, which is the softest looking, least hospital looking fabric we can find. It's only available in a small number of colors. So from that, we then select a mix that we like, or a selection which are our preferred ones of those, or some of them are quite similar. So these are this gives us 5 sort of threads that are potential starting points for the colors we might work with for the most restrictive part of the palette. And then we start to see how these colors might look if we start to match them and use them in other parts of our ideas. This is testing those in the ceramics here and some worktops. This is how we start to think how we then maybe take those colors into different types of spaces. So all of this stuff's sort of early, sketchy work. But for example, here we might work our bamboo fitted furniture in some way. It's quite sort of minimal and slick. How we might then take, say, like a grey flooring. I think we might have some issues doing a grey wall with contrast and vision rules about these things. But let's say we had a kind of very neutral background with our highlight colours and raw materials in a waiting area, and then how we might invert that into circulation spaces. So we take the highlight colour and use that on the large surface of the floor and around the wall details, and then put the more monochrome subtle stuff onto the walls. Again, looking at the ranges that are available, the wall protections, the plastics and the bumpers, those sorts of ranges are a little bit more restrictive in how much control we have over the colours. A blue option, purples. So we're just testing different ways that we might work with different parts of the ranges of what's out there for what we might be able to achieve. So that's an overview of roughly where we're at, with a little bit of a, hopefully not close to 20 minutes of chat. Everything's very much up for grabs, but at the moment we are working primarily on this computational design process with Adam, which we hope will start to generate the imagery that we can use in creating surfaces which are informed by or inspired by the blossoms and other things. One thing I forgot to say actually about our algorithmic growing with the blossoms and the like is we're hoping we might be able to incorporate some medical imaging data to help generate those algorithms. But hopefully it will tie together in some kind of coherent design process that leads to some beautiful surfaces eventually.